Excellent.
Hi everyone, welcome to the latest episode of Disabled Lawyer and Proud. In this episode, we have Dr. Daniel Taylor. Dr. Taylor is
Hello.
used to be a research scientist in theoretical biophysics.
That's right.
Hopefully, he later pursued a career at the bar, which is what he's doing now. And obviously, as part of that, he converted his degrees into a law degree using a graduate diploma in law. I'm pleased to be able to interview Daniel. We've engaged quite often online, and we've appeared on panels together, so it's great to have you on Disabled Lawyer and Proud.
Thank you for having me, Dan.
No problem. To kick off, I'm going to ask you one of the biggest questions you can possibly ask a disabled person, and that is, what does being disabled mean to you?
So it's a difficult question, isn't it? Because my take on this is always, unlike other maybe minority groups, I think being disabled is slightly different to others. And the reason why I say that is because the reality is, I don't think anyone would ever choose to be disabled if given a choice. Whereas I think other minority groups, there is a certain there is a certain ability to kind of take, unique characteristics about the minority group they're in, and you can often, display or put forward a positive case. But with, I think, disability, it's very hard to say, how do you quantify, or how do you give some sort of qualitative response to being disabled? What does it mean to me? My disability is unique to me, and like a lot of disabilities, disabilities are unique to the person with the disability, because the person with the disability chooses to handle that disability very differently. And what I would say is, I think what it means to me in particular is, I think being disabled has given me a certain thick skin that I think probably others who aren't disabled don't have. And the reason I say that is because when you are disabled, you are essentially left to solve your own problems. And often when a problem comes up, the only person who can really deal with that problem or overcome that problem is the person with the disability. And it's entirely down to that person how they cope with it. And some people don't cope with it very well at all. Others develop very strong survival mechanisms or problem-solving abilities in order to actually overcome it. So I would say, to answer your question in a very long-winded, verbose way, Dan, I would say my disability makes me feel special in a way, because I think it's given me a perspective that I wouldn't have necessarily had being able-bodied.
That's really interesting, particularly when you mention about the way we problem solve, and the way that we often overcome all the barriers and difficulties that come our way.
Yes.
I often feel nobody can solve my problems better than what I can, even though I have supportive family and friends. So I do resonate with that kind of ideology and our enhanced problem-solving capabilities.
Yes, and what I would say is, it's almost like the longer you, and how can I put this? The problem is, and I'm sure you find this as well, Dan, is sometimes it's the same problem over and over again. And it's so annoying. So for example, when I phone up a restaurant or somewhere I want to go to, and I want to say, you know, can I come and eat at your restaurant, or let's say it's a cafe, can I come and eat at your cafe? And the number of times you phone them up and you say, you know, are you wheelchair accessible? And first of all, they don't know. So that's a pretty big red flag as far as I'm concerned. And then they go and check and they go, well, there's a bit of a step, but I think it's doable. If not, we can lift you up. That's always the kind of go-to response. Oh, we can lift you up, we can overcome it and things. And then you end up going to the cafe or restaurant and you get there, and there's a whacking great big step and you think, well, no, this isn't any good. And then you almost have to suggest to them, you know, have you got a ramp? Have you got a bit of wood you can put, you know, on the step to make it accessible? Can you put a table and chairs outside? And if anything, you become the problem solver for them. You know, you're the one who has to generate all these options to try and solve a problem they have created or they've been blind to for all this time. And it's incredible how often the same problems seem to repeat themselves in almost the same avenues of life. And then you get the same questions about, oh, you know, some people think you're a part-time wheelchair user. So they say something along the lines of, oh, can you leave your wheelchair over there? You know, can you walk a short distance? You know, can you do all these things? And you think, well, firstly, it's not really, you know, your business what I can and can't do. But equally, you shouldn't make all these assumptions that people can basically overcome barriers that you've put in their way.
And I think it's quite interesting that we published a similar review about problem solving. Yeah. And we both want to have long careers at the bar, where essentially you are solving other people's problems.
Yes.
It all works out quite well. We're doing this lawyer and Brown campaign in July because it's Disability Pride Month. And
yes.
I'm just wondering, what does Disability Pride mean to you?
So again, I think it's an interesting concept, isn't it? Because essentially, with something like LGBT Pride, obviously, I think with something like that, I can definitely understand why the LGBT community has kind of embraced this concept of pride. You know, they're proud. This is something they identify as. This is something that, you know, they can sort of take on the establishment with. And of course, this comes with a very historic sort of battle that they fought since, you know, well, I would have said the 1960s, but in reality, it's probably been going on far longer than that. It was only, of course, in the 1960s that they legalized homosexuality. So, but I don't feel, if I'm being brutally honest, I don't feel that the disabled community has when I say achieved the same things as the LGBT community, what I mean is, I don't think society has been as accepting of disability as it has been about LGBT. So I think the Pride movement is very important because it's, if you like, giving us a voice, giving us a representation that's obviously very much needed. But I think there is so far that the disabled community has to go before we can sort of get a microphone out and say, you know, we're here and we're proud and, you know, we you know, accept us and things like that. Because if anything, I would say it's not us that needs to change, a bit like the LGBT community. It's everyone else that has to change their attitudes and change, you know, simple things like, you know, being able to access a train, being able to get on a plane without the rigmarole of being carried on and carried off and someone having to then retrieve your wheelchair and then losing it at the airport, or, you know, fire safety. You know, if you get stuck at the top of a building, they can't get disabled people out. You have to stay in a sheltered corridor. All these things I would say are fairly, they're such antediluvian or archaic perspectives that people, and I just gave the example a minute ago about restaurants and cafes and things. How can we be taken seriously, or how can we attempt to be treated equally to others until everyone acknowledges there's an inherent prejudice against the disabled community, which, to be blunt, I don't really think there's the same drive and determination with disability as there has been with the LGBT movement. I don't know if you feel like that. I don't know if you feel like that as well, Dan. I'd be interested to know your opinion.
I'm not really looking of interview, but you gave me really interesting good points about
Yes.
where a play comes from, and
Yes.
how we get it from other community groups.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not meaning to be, but for me, it can be fun in the community that we are, because we all come from different backgrounds, but we all experience disabling experiences, because not only because of our impairments, but also society, and we have that in common, but yet we persevere with that, and we do what we can to live independent lives in very difficult circumstances. So I think that's where the play comes from. And I think as an identity, we are very diverse identity, and that's something to be proud of.
Yes, absolutely.
And on the issue of exceptions, I think we face more difficulties and maybe other sexual groups, because it's harder for us to be able to challenge the system.
Yeah.
Because
I don't know.
You can't challenge the system if you can't get out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, I was actually just about to make this exact point. The different, I mean, this is again my opinion, of course, but this is why I'm on your interview, to give my opinion. But the thing is, when you've got a disability, it is almost like having a full-time job on top of another job you have already, or a part-time job. Because at the end of the day, as you say, when you're reliant on others in order just to get up in the morning, or to dress yourself, or to do any menial task, to prepare food to eat and things like that, that is an extra level of complexity and difficulty that I would argue almost no other minority would have to grapple with in the same way. In terms of, this is obviously an interview about the legal profession and things like that. There are some. And I don't, by the way, I'm not here to create class warfare and turn minority against minority. That's not the point at all I'm trying to make. This is an interview about disability. But the thing about disability is when you finish your 9-to-5 job and go home, it's not like we can just leave our disability at work, or we can leave our disability at home and go to work. It's something. It's a big rock around our neck. All the time, 24/7. And I think a lot of people who don't live with a disability cannot possibly understand what that's like on a day-to-day basis.
I agree. For example, for me to be able to lead an independent life, I manage a team of PAs. So I'm an employer to about 5 or 6 PAs at any given time. So before I can pursue my legal career before I can among the Association of Disabled Lawyers, before I
Yes.
can take part in all the other committees I'm on.
Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
an employer, so I have to deal with all the legal obligations that come with being an employer. I have to run a payroll. I have
Exactly.
to manage
Exactly.
a
Yeah.
team of
Yeah.
people who have given skills and work ethics and trying to work out different ways to get the best out of them. And
Yes. Yeah.
that's even before you start again.
Exactly. Exactly. Before you even get to work, think of the amount of time and effort you've had to spend, just trying to manage people or trying to, just get basic things done. It's quite incredible, really. But you would have no idea about that unless you had that experience.
But I do think that's something we should be proud of.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I don't know about you, but especially in the legal world as well, when people talk about, what's your experience with, say, employment law? Well, when you employ a team of carers, when you have to rely on people coming in and helping you or facilitating things. I mean, I can think of, just off the top of my head, I've got several wheelchairs, I've got an adapted car, I've got various gym equipment, I've got equipment in my home, all these different bits of kit, they break, they need servicing, they need replacing. This is a huge undertaking for somebody without the added complication of wanting a full-time job, especially, a very complex full-time job such as the bar.
But it can be good. We've mentioned a lot about disability and the barriers and everything like that. One of the key aims of this campaign is to encourage people to pursue legal careers, not only at the bar but across the whole legal sector. In order to do that, it's good to have role models that you can see that are a bit like you. With that in mind, would you mind telling us a bit more about your impairment and what that involves?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I suppose I don't know if I can call myself unique in terms of, so my disability was acquired. So what happened was when I was 17, I was basically hit by a drunk driver and I was paralyzed from the neck down. So I'm a tetraplegic. So my disability came as a result of an accident. So what I'm in a position of being able to say is I've seen life from both perspectives. So I've seen life able-bodied and I've seen life disabled, which is why earlier on in this interview I said about not having any awareness of issues that disabled people have. And the reason why I say that is because when I was able-bodied, I didn't walk around thinking, oh, I wonder how a wheelchair user would deal with this problem, or when I used to walk through doorways, I used to simply walk through doorways, climb stairs and things. I wasn't always looking for lifts. I wasn't always looking for automatic doors. I wasn't looking at steps. Everything was totally taken for granted. But obviously after my accident, when I became disabled, I then had this whole different perspective and awareness of disability issues. As a result of my paralysis, obviously I can't move or feel anything from the chest downwards, so I'm dependent on wheelchairs to get around in. I do use a manual chair around the house. That's more to just keep me fit and able, and keeping my metabolism as high as possible. But I do use an electric chair when I'm not in the house because I think trying to navigate outside of my house in a manual chair is just too difficult. There's too many imponderables. So I use an electric chair. Obviously, that means I've got no control of anything, south of where my disability is. So, that brings with it all sorts of complications, such as, incontinence, pressure sores developing, pressure areas, bone density problems, muscle wastage problems, weight management problems. You've got to really be on it in terms of looking at potential problems that obviously I can't feel pain. So I might have something that's hurting me. I don't know about it. So you have to be extra vigilant and lead, I would have said, a fairly, I couldn't, for example, just eat whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted at any given time. I would have to really give serious thought to what I'm going to eat throughout the day or throughout the week, because obviously eating certain foods may elicit certain biological responses that are unwanted. But at the same time, I don't really want to eat lots of very calorific food because I would gain weight, and that would then have a knock-on effect in terms of my mobility and, create perhaps cardiac problems later on, diabetes problems. So I suppose the point I'm making in a very, again, long-winded, verbose way, Dan, is that when you look at someone in a wheelchair and say, what is your impairment? What is your disability? Yes, it is essentially a mobility problem. It is having paralysis and not being able to move certain extremities. But like an iceberg, you scratch the surface and you go down further and you realize actually the paralysis itself in some ways is maybe the less difficult part of the spectrum to deal with when you've got all these other issues in play at the same time.
Yeah, it's a constant battle, and one that we keep on winning.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I know it sounds really, really cheesy, but every birthday, I think to myself, wow, I've managed to go another year. Like I've managed to keep on going, and it seems very cheesy and trite to say that, but I genuinely do think that actually, of all the problems that can happen to you, just getting another year down the line just seems it seems incredible sometimes. Because I actually, at the beginning of this year, I was very, very ill in hospital. I actually had sepsis. And I had sepsis because I actually had a kidney stone that got lodged in my urethra, so I couldn't urine from my right kidney wasn't getting into my bladder, so there was a backlog, and I ended up in A&E hospital, very, very ill indeed. They put me on some very serious IV antibiotics, and I was really ill, and unfortunately this did coincide with pupillage season, so it couldn't really have come at a worse time. I mean, thankfully, I'm over it now. But for 4 months, I was in a really bad way, and I was very, very ill. And that was largely because I had this kidney stone in my right bladder, and I couldn't feel it. I had no pain sensation. I had no idea it was going on. I just suddenly became very ill, and luckily, I managed to get to hospital fast enough to do something about it. But if I hadn't gone to hospital quickly enough, who knows what would have happened? I mean, it could have almost certainly been fatal.
Life often throws difficulties and ups and downs always, and in your case, your way. You've obviously been quite successful in your previous career, and I suspect you will be successful in your new one.
Well, here's hoping. Here's hoping.
What have been your best experiences in your career?
So my previous career or the bar?
In general.
Okay, in general.
I mean, obviously, we're talking to you as an aspiring barrister, but please use your previous experience to inform where you come from and where you're going.
So, positive experiences. So, I mean, I was really pleased when I got some research papers published with my with the PhD, I managed to get 3 research papers published, which felt really good, because I did feel like I'd made it as a researcher. I'd actually gotten to the point where people were actually listening and paying attention to the research I was doing. So I thought that was great in order to kind of make it. I mean, I haven't quite gotten there yet at the bar, but I really felt. I live in Norwich, so the problem is that Norwich is kind of miles away from everywhere. It's really not an easy place to visit or go to unless you live there. And for 2 years, when I was undertaking the bar course part-time, I travelled to London twice a week via train. It was a 2-hour journey there and a 2-hour journey back again. And I must confess, at the time, I didn't think anything of it. But I look back on it now and I think, wow, I cannot believe I travelled to London twice a week for 2 years, to study and then come straight back again, because that was quite a tall order. I would leave after lunchtime and I probably wouldn't get back into Norwich until maybe 1 o'clock in the morning. So it was a real, and I was also still undertaking volunteer work in Norwich at the time. So I was balancing all these things. And this is, of course, before the dreaded C word pandemic popped up, which, by the way, made life far more difficult and very taxing. So so I do feel as though just even being able to go to London and commute twice a week and engage in the same way as anyone else who wasn't having to undertake that commute, who lived in London already. I do look back on it. I think, wow, I can't believe I actually did that. That was quite something.
Yeah, it is quite something. I mean, I knew you when you were doing the bar course. We were doing
Yes,
it
yeah, I used to bump into you.
At some point. At
Yes.
one point, we were both on the course.
Yes.
Would you say that constitutes one of the biggest obstacles in your career towards the bar?
Wow. I mean, so I did find, when you are going and doing mini pupilages and things, which is all kind of part and parcel of, it's another hoop you have to jump through in order to get to the bar and things. I did find some of those very taxing indeed, because, mostly because of the inaccessibility that I saw very early on at the bar. You would undertake a mini pupillage at a set of chambers, and you'd phone up and say, where am I, on Monday, or where do you want me and things, and they'd say, oh, we want you here, and you'd then say, am I okay? Is it wheelchair accessible? Is this all doable? And they then say, oh, we don't know. You'll have to find out when you get there. And you think, well, it would be good to have some prior knowledge to know if I'm going to travel all that way on the whim that hopefully it would be accessible. And some of the buildings that the chambers are based in, particularly around Temple, I get that they are very old buildings, so you can't necessarily stick a lift or a ramp in them. But at the same time, it wasn't like they were kind of going out of their way to help. So you kind of felt like you were fighting on several fronts. You were having to show you were dedicated to a career at the bar and wanted to go along and kind of interact and partake. But at the same time, you thought, well, what is the point of me turning up here to sit at the bottom of a set of stairs and not being able to see anyone or engage with anyone? So that was at points slightly soul destroying, slightly annoying. I remember turning up at courts, having travelled for a very, very long period, and thinking, oh, I can't actually access, the court that the case I'm supposed to be watching is in, or I can't get to that part of the court. And, it's you as a disabled person, I don't think what people don't understand is that you don't necessarily want pardon the kind of metaphors here, but it's not like you want to leg up. You don't want to be treated in a position of an advantaged position. What you really want is you just want to be treated like everyone else. You want a level playing field, and you want to be treated like anybody else. You don't want any favors. You don't want any additional caveats. And when you're in a situation whereby you can't even get into the same room or the same building as your contemporaries, it then makes you feel alienated. And not only is it a physical, as in a physical access problem, but it then becomes a mental problem, because it makes you feel less than normal. It sort of doubles down on the disability you have already, because it makes you feel so hopeless, and it makes you feel you're not worthy. So it's not only bad enough you've got to contend with the physical disability, but there's also a lot going on in here. There's a lot of mental kind of stress and struggles that you undertake at the same time, if that makes any sense.
No, it makes perfect sense.
Excellent. Good. I'm glad.
I think your views will agree.
Good.
We hope. I might be like to argue somebody with a significant impairment or an impairment is needs managing.
Yes.
Will not be an advantage under any circumstance, because
yes.
It gets advantage we experience is so great, no level of adjustment will adequately mitigate at all, indeed make us an advantage. I think that's something to think about. Yeah. The whole idea of putting disabled people at an advantage is a very wrong concept.
It is.
I actually don't think it's possible in many cases.
Well, it's weird, because when you it's so strange, because when you apply for pupillage, you see all these chambers and sets, and they say we've got a positive disability inclusion policy, and they talk of all these initiatives that they're trying to undertake to kind of make life easier and to kind of benefit. And they say, we'll give a free interview to you if you've got a disability. We'll offer, and actually, I have applied for those chambers that have offered this, because I thought, well, it's all experience, it all helps you and things. And then actually, I didn't even get an interview with any of the chambers that offered a positive recruitment, disability recruitment. I forget what it's called. I'm sure it's something like, it's a disability confident. I think that's what they call themselves. Yes, that's right. And they call themselves disability confident sets or chambers. And they say, would you like to apply for a disability? Tick yes. So you tick yes. And then a couple of weeks later, you then get this thing saying, oh, we're not, you haven't been picked for the next round, which is fine. I haven't got a problem with that. It's all about choosing the best candidates. But I wish these chambers would just have the balls, or just have the chutzpah to say, actually, you're not good enough, not based on your disability, but based on your application. I don't understand this. We need to kind of feather the nest, and we need to sweeten the deal for those with a disability. I don't know if they're trying to give themselves a more positive image in comparison to other chambers, but to my mind, it seems slightly, I don't know if you would agree, it seems more cruel to me to kind of say to people with a disability, we're going to help you out here. We're going to sort of make this process easier for you, and then not deliver on that.
I think it leads into what I was saying earlier about a disadvantage. I mean,
yes.
the disability confidence scheme is one way you get a percentage reduction of the amount of marks you need to attain to get an interview.
Yes.
But
Yes. Yeah.
if you can't get work experience because
Yes.
many of the opportunities aren't accessible to you,
Yeah.
whether
Well, that's
because of wheelchair access or other kind of accessibility needs. And
Yes.
what's the point?
Yeah.
As you plug, it becomes somewhat technistic because disadvantage isn't mean mitigating.
No, and also what I think, I mean, I know this interview is about disability, so I want to try and stay on topic and on point, but you know, you have to also appreciate that there are other, and I'm saying this because I know you're from quite a working class background, Dan, so I know I'm on safe ground with you talking about the class thing, but you know, I come from a very working class background as well in the east of England, and actually sometimes the disadvantages I face aren't necessarily anything to do with disability. I think sometimes it's because, you know, I haven't got the first clue about what kind of you know, things I need to put in a pupillage application, or you know, how to debate properly, how to, you know, conduct oneself, you know, with another member of the bar, because you know, my school, you know, people at my school just didn't go to the bar. They didn't aspire to the professional disciplines. It was a state comprehensive school, and the majority of people, you know, went into trade, you know, and you know, tertiary sector jobs and things like that. So, you know, in certain situations, you know, we can talk about the disadvantages of being disabled, and separate to that, we can talk about the disadvantages of not perhaps coming from, you know, the right socioeconomic class. But when you marry those together, you get someone who's disabled from, you know, a very working class, you know, socioeconomic class that hasn't necessarily always been very favourable to the bar. You know, you're then almost adding another ingredient to a situation that's not great to begin with, if that makes any sense.
It makes actually perfect sense.
Good. I'm glad. I knew you would get it, Dad.
I mean, I can't remember when my class came into it, but yeah, I understand. Yeah, you don't know anybody in the profession when you aspire to be in it. You don't understand properly.
Yeah. I mean, there is a certain collegiate club vibe that you get, and I don't think I don't even know if people are even aware that it happens, but it definitely does. And you know, like you, not even, I mean, I literally came to law not knowing a single solicitor or a single barrister. I didn't, do you know what? I came to the bar, I didn't even know you could get scholarships to the bar. That's how inexperienced and how much I knew nothing. I didn't even know you could get scholarships. So because I didn't know, I didn't apply. And it was only when I started the bar that I spoke to others, and they said, oh yes, you know, I applied for this, I applied for that, I got money from here, money from there. And they were in the know because they knew of others, or they had connections that kind of tied all these loose ends together.
It's hard to get your head around, that's for sure.
Yes.
Very briefly, would you be able to tell me what advice you would give somebody who was a few years behind you and considering a career? About what advice would you give?
Right. Okay. So firstly, I would say there are multiple opportunities to receive funding to go to the bar, which obviously I didn't know when I started. So, you know, obviously you would have to explore those options because they make a huge difference to you know, I mean, it's pretty expensive. Let's be honest. Yeah, if you want to do the bar, it's not cheap, and it really hits you in the pocket And it really also, it costs you a lot of social capital as well. You know, when you're studying the bar, you don't have a lot of free time. You don't necessarily do a lot of fun things when you're studying for the bar, because you don't have a lot of time to do fun things. So you have to put a lot of life events, and you have to pause lots of things. So if I was talking to myself 2, 3, 4 years ago, when I thought, yes, I want to do the bar, I would say something along the lines of, well, make sure you've explored all the options available to try and make studying at the bar as easy as possible. Also, are you willing to essentially give up almost every weekend, almost every moment of free time you used to have for essentially a whole year or a year and a half or 2 years, depending on how you undertake study, whether it's part-time or full-time? Because I think a lot of people come to the bar thinking it's going to be it's going to be like being back doing your undergraduate. You know, there's going to be periods where you have to cram a lot of information into your head for an exam. You might have to work, late into the night to get an essay deadline completed. And it really isn't like that. You've got to be reading constantly, pretty much all the time. And it really, really does affect your mental health. I don't think there's any polite way of saying it. You know, if you're someone who struggles, with workloads and being anxious, and sometimes the stress gets to you, then maybe the bar isn't for you, because at the end of the bar, these sets, these chambers are really, they take no prisoners. Let's be honest, the pupillage application process, I mean, I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy, let alone someone I like, because the stresses and strains of applying and having to jump through hoops and having to go to the interviews, which often result in absolutely nothing for a period of a number of years. I mean, you've got to be pretty bulletproof, and you've got to be pretty determined to get to the end of it. So, make sure you really, really want it, and make sure you can handle it, because I cannot think of a worse situation than starting it, paying an exorbitant amount of money, which, let's be pretty honest, I don't think the bar course is worth the money that people pay for it. To suddenly realize you get halfway through or a third of the way through and think, actually, I don't enjoy this, I B, don't really want this, and C, I can't handle this. Because I think in that situation, nobody wins and everyone loses.
I think being practical is always important, but
yes.
I do feel I will be careful not to say you can't do it. I do believe people in different situations can do it. It's about how you can do it and how you achieve what you want to achieve. It's about planning how you are going to overcome all these issues. Thank you for joining, gang. It's been fantastic. I'm sure we could talk for hours.
Yes, undoubtedly.
Yes. For people who don't know who I am, I'm Daniel Holmes. I'm the chair of the Association of Disabled Lawyers. Thank you for watching yet again one of our episodes of Disabled Lawyer. I look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thank you. Take care.